This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Yesterday was just one of those days. It really reminds you of how awesome sports are. Of course, I'm talking partly due to myself because we had the Northwestern Wildcats men's basketball team beating Purdue. So that's one aspect of it just for me, but also last night's game was fun. And I think for me, at least, I love watching the Super Bowl with like a group of people because I think it's a fun atmosphere. I watch every game during the regular season by myself. I'm okay not devoting full attention to just one game. You know, if it means I get to have a fun atmosphere, people sweating around me and stuff like that. I think that's a lot of fun. And watching a really good game where two young quarterbacks balled out, played amazing football, and the Chiefs win that game. But honestly, I think we all won. It was a fun game. It was a fun day for sports. And I think a great day to I think it was emblematic of a lot of the key things that we can take into 2023 as better. So what we're going to do today is we're going to recap the Super Bowl first, but then also take a look at 5 takeaways I've had from this postseason, from that game, and from the overall year as a whole. We can take into our betting thoughts for 2023. So I'm going to go through all that for today. We'll get back into talking NBA, talking PGA tomorrow on the show. We'll talk some NASCAR on Wednesday. So we'll get into forward-looking stuff, actual bet recommendations and stuff like that. But wanted to go more big picture for today, recap the Super Bowl, and break down some betting takeaways from last night. We'll dive on into that in just one second. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sadas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Here, like I said, to recap last night's Super Bowl 57, break down the key takeaways, talk about the game, talk about the betting angles on it, and take a look forward to what we should learn from it for 2023. We'll dive into all that in just one second, but as a reminder, make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast, because a lot of good shows coming up this week. We'll have some NHL talk in there as well. We'll talk some English Premier League. It's going to be a mixed bag as we get out of the NFL season. Just kind of talking about all the sports in action, talking about all that stuff. I will not be talking XFL. Maybe we'll get someone on the show who will do it for me, but not gonna be me. I can ask some questions, but not personally. But a lot of other really good stuff, really fun stuff for this week. So make sure you subscribe to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out over on the FanDuel YouTube page, where you can get these shows posted after the fact. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WIN-IT. In Wyoming and Kansas, 1-800-522-4700, or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana, 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. And in West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Okay, so I want to take a quick look back at last night's game. And we had a lot of bets last week on the show. We had 4 separate shows on it, so don't have a lot of time to recap everything we discussed in the show. So instead of doing covering the past, I wanted to go through some key takeaways from this game, from the postseason, season overall, and what we can carry into this year. And most of those do revolve around some aspect of last night's game. And the first thing is that I had the Chiefs money line plus 110 or plus 108, depending if you bet it at FanDuel or elsewhere, from last Monday, and they were down 10 at the half. Even with that being true, never really felt like they were out of it, which is kind of annoying in a way because a lot of times it can be liberating to be like, okay, I've lost this bet. I can just enjoy the second half of the game. Instead, the Chiefs, you're always sweating because they might come back. But you never have the feeler out of it. We'll talk more about what that means later on. But I think overall, my biggest takeaway from last night was how freaking efficient on offense the Chiefs were, but also both teams. The Chiefs last night averaged 0.44 EPA per dropback passing and 0.23 EPA per attempt rushing. Those are via next gen stats. And for some context on that, Patrick Mahomes led the league during the regular season in EPA per dropback at 0.22. The Chiefs were better than that, both passing and rushing last night. That is bananas. And Jalen Hurts did it too. He was at 0.29 EPA per dropback passing, which does not count what he did as a rusher. All those quarterback sneaks. He was actually above, he was at 0.01 as a rusher, even if you include the fumble return for a touchdown. So these two guys put on a show. It was absolutely insane. So sure, we could talk about the holding call if we wanted to. It was a big play. It was a bummer to have such a fun game kind of come to an end effectively on a play that, while was holding, was not blatant. He didn't tackle him, anything like that. It was holding. James Bradbury said it was holding, and, that matters. I think it's important, though, to note that that holding call didn't factor into those EPA numbers. And the Chiefs, their offense was unstoppable last night for the most part. The Eagles were pretty unstoppable themselves, too, on offense. So I think we need to give like a round of applause to both teams, both coaching staffs, both quarterbacks. But I think that performance by the Chiefs offense, Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, legendary stuff. And that was my biggest takeaway, is that they're amazing. I know it's not a huge takeaway, but like, it was just so fun to watch that. As far as the MVP last night goes, my initial thought was Hurts. I thought that Jalen Hurts, despite the loss, should have been the MVP. That's something they do very often. It would not have been the first time, I don't believe, but I thought with the way he played initially, my gut reaction was Hurts should have still been MVP. All the sneaks, 3 rushing touchdowns, really good passing efficiency too, some just sicko throws, like really good stuff. I thought he should have been MVP. Then this morning, pulling up the EPA numbers, I'm not fretting EPA numbers during the game, but looking at Mahomes' EPA numbers, I kind of get it. So I think they would have been justified giving it to Hurts, given how well he played, given the impact he had in that game. But I think it had to be one of the two quarterbacks with the show they put on. I did push Isaiah Pacheco MVP during last week. He was 50-1. He was 50-1 for a reason. Maybe if that third and short call where he got the end around and got tackled in the open field, maybe if that's a touchdown, he's in consideration because he would have had like 100 or so yards and 2 touchdowns at that point. It should have been the quarterbacks. It was the right call. I think you reasonably could have given it to either guy. Even with Hurts losing, I think he could have been MVP. So I don't disagree with the call. I think that it was the right call looking at the EPA numbers. But those two guys were phenomenal last night. Just really fun to watch those two. And finally, I think that the other takeaway I had is that how much fun betting can make things, even if there's no money on the line. Because we were at a Super Bowl party last night with some friends, and we had a pool, a picks pool, $5 from each person. So super low money on the line, and just picked various props, coin toss, the over-under for the anthem, Gatorade colors, stuff like that. And it means that even people who don't like football or don't care can be engaged in the game and have something to root for. And I think that element is super fun. At the end of the game, instead of talking about, okay, he's going to be MVP, we're asking what the Gatorade color was. I look it up on Twitter. Like, everyone's mad that we didn't get to see the Gatorade, stuff like that. It just adds like an extra layer of fun. I love that aspect of gamifying sports where it can get more people engaged with stuff that I love. I love watching football, love baseball, NASCAR, all this stuff. And I like that more people can get engaged with it via this outlet. I think that the key part there is it's important that it's done so in a way where if you lose, it's no big deal. Because I hope you had fun last night. I hope you had a lot of fun last night. But think about what it would have been if you had been overextended. And it stinks to lose a bit of money. Like, let's say you lose a bit of money, you're going to be bummed regardless. But with a game like that, I want to make sure I am limited enough in my bets where even if I lose every single bet, I can still enjoy myself. I don't want to deprive myself of having fun like I did last night because I'm too busy betting or too busy sweating bets. Sports are supposed to be fun. So make sure you keep your bets in check so that you can just enjoy the game rather than getting frustrated if things don't hit. I think that that's a key takeaway always. It is always important to never bet more than you can afford to lose. Always, always, always. It's especially true for Super Bowl because like there are so many markets, so many dumb markets you can bet on and stuff like that. I want to enjoy the game. It's a lot easier for me personally to enjoy the game if I have less on the line. So I do like the betting aspect of it. I love that it can get people engaged, but responsibly. I like the low dollar aspect of it when we're betting socially with people and stuff like that. And I don't change my process in terms of betting the Super Bowl. I want to keep things in check there as well to make sure I can just enjoy myself and not be sweating things constantly. But it is fun when you can add the extra layer of people who may not be huge football fans. So that's my thoughts on last night's game. I want to spin that forward, though, and take a look back at kind of lump it into the postseason as a whole, the 2022 season as a whole, and talk about how we can spin those takeaways forward to betting 2023. And obviously, we don't want to overreact to just one game because it can lead you down a bad path. I think that honestly, I had a bit of that last year, like with the Jalen Hurts game against the Buccaneers in the playoffs. Like I think I overweighted that game in my head. So it's important not to overweigh one game in your head. But I do want to use last night as kind of a vehicle for discussing other takeaways I've had this year that I want to carry to next year. And I think the big thing for me goes back to what we discussed before. The Chiefs were down 10, never felt like they were out of it because passing is still king. And that's my first takeaway here is that passing is still king. The Chiefs were down 10. Didn't matter because having an efficient passing offense means you can make up ground in a hurry. Now, that's true with the Eagles, too. If they had gotten behind, I probably wouldn't have felt like they were out of it because they could throw. A negative game script for a team with a good passing offense is not a death sentence. They can make up ground and score points. So I've talked about the entirety of the year about how I'm running two models for this year. One model weighs passing pretty heavily, and the other one is more agnostic about passing versus rushing, but it separates early downs and late downs. Early down EPA, late down success rate. And I thought the old one would be better because I thought that the new one would be better because the old one might overweigh passing. And I like the idea of having early down EPA, late down success rate. I love that thought process. And that's why I built that model, but didn't seem to be the case. So I ran both models concurrently from week 13 on. And I wanted to see which one performed better. And that'd be the one I'd use primarily for next year. So it's competition. It's a sample of 104 games. So it's a small sample. And that's important to keep in mind. But I wanted to compare the two using mean squared error. If you're building a model, mean squared error is your best friend. Basically, it tells you how far off were you from the final score, not factoring in the direction. So let's say hypothetically, I had the Chiefs favored by 3 last night. If they had lost by 1, error there would be 4 or -4, depending which way you want to go. And then you square it so that it's non-directional. So the mean squared error from off by 4 points is 16. If we go from week 13 on, the old model on Tuesdays had a mean squared error of 137.61. The new model was 143.19. So the old model beat the new one there. The markets on Tuesday for context, so like the betting lines, were 141.45. So the old model beat the Tuesday market and the new model did not. And that's kind of the key thing is if it's better but doesn't beat the market, who cares? So the old model was better there. Same thing with the close. After adjusting for injuries, the old model on game days had a mean squared error of 135.23. The new one was 143.12 and the market 141.45. So again, the old model beat the market and the new one did not. The new model still had a positive ROI. Not sure how sustainable that was, given that it had a worse mean squared error than the market did. But if I look at just spread bet recommendations from that model from week 13 on, it was positive 13.87%, which is really good. I love to take that typically. But the old model in that sample, 36.3% ROI, which is not sustainable. That's not going to stick. And I think that it's important to mention that the older model did not do that well for the full season. If I just bet every spread I recommended for the full year, the ROI would have been 13.1%. I didn't do that. I did not have a good year in NFL this year. I should have done that. Did not do that. So the model was good. I was not. And I think that's important distinction to make. Although the model did well, I did not have a great year betting NFL. So in the news, in the sample I looked at here, the new model kicked the old, or the old model kicked the new model's butt. And I think a lot of that is because of how heavily it weighs passing. It was high in teams like the Lions, like the Jags, due to their passing efficiency, and the Bengals too, up until the conference championship, where I thought they were overvalued there. And those teams performed really well. So if you're building out a new betting model for the NFL, and I think with the proliferation of legalization, I could see a lot of you trying to dive into that the first time this offseason. I would segment efficiency by rushing and passing and make sure passing has more weight even than like overall EPA potentially. That's what mine has. It gives you multiple routes to a win or a cover, because even if you fall behind, you still have a shot. And it's the same thing on defense too, where passing efficiency or passing defensive efficiency matters more than overall than rushing defensive efficiency and stuff like that. So I'm going to roll into 2023 with the old model being my base model. I'm still going to run the other one too to expand the sample. It's on only 104 games. It had a higher correlation to the market, which I think matters. I think you want to generally be pretty close to the market. But my win total bets will be based on that old model. And as opposed to calling it the old model, which seems dismissive, I will stop calling it that. I will call it now the base model, my primary model, and then the new model will be the alternate model. I think that's the way I'll phrase them going forward. So it's not old versus new, because new implies that one's better, which it clearly was not down the stretch. So takeaway number one, passing is still king. And I think that old model performed better because it put more weight in passing than the other one did. Second takeaway is that you can still find good betting value during the playoffs. When I first started betting, I was worried that there wouldn't be a lot of betting value during the postseason, because there's a lot of money on these games, a lot of attention, and a lot of attention means smart people are putting money into this market and likely making it efficient. That was my thought process, at least. We had John Sheeran on, the director of trading at FanDuel Sportsbook. We had him on covering the spread 4 or so years ago, I think. And he said, no, actually, with so much attention, you get a lot of non-smart money in the market. And that can lead to still decently inefficient lines. And I think we saw that. If we look at just the postseason, my primary model saw value in seven games. So 7 out of 13, just over half. And the team that it said to bet on covered in 6 of those 7 games. The one miss was the 49ers against the Eagles. That was not close. That was a bummer. I also had the Bucks +3 as one of my bets on the show, but that was based on the new model. And that bet did not work. Did not come close. That model went 4-1, with that one being the one loss this year, but it found value in just 5 out of 13 games versus 7 out of 13 for the other model. So I think the takeaway for me is I can still get a decent number of bets in if I don't change my criteria for betting just because of the postseason, just because there are fewer games. So to me, it's kind of make sure you keep your process in the postseason. Make sure you're not betting games that you wouldn't bet if it were during the regular season, because there's always next year. There's always other sports you can bet and stuff like that. I don't think you should change your threshold in order to get more bets out during the playoffs. It's a really good way to lose some money. So, and those bets were profitable too. So the takeaway is don't change your standards for the playoffs. Be okay not having bets. Like there are going to be games or days where you don't have bets out there. That should be okay. It's okay being comfortable with that, taking the long view and realizing that there will be more bets down the line, because you can find value in the playoffs. It can be good value and it can be profitable. You can find value in a decent number of games. Just don't force it. Don't change your standards just because there are fewer games to bet on for that week. Another takeaway from me from last night is that scoring is not dead. And it can be high when guys are healthy. I think that's a very important caveat to make, because my initial thought when I saw that the total for the Super Bowl was 49.5 at open, I thought my numbers would stay under, because the Eagles defense is solid. They run a decent amount, which means that they drain clock a bit more, and 49.5 was a big number. But when I ran my numbers before injury adjustments for the Chiefs, it was at 51. It was at 49.97 after grading down for what I thought would be more guys missing than what wound up missing. And then we saw what happened. The market did go up, I think, as we got a good idea of the health of the receivers. So it went up, and I think that was totally appropriate. And the reason why that worked was because we had 2 really good quarterbacks in this game, 2 really good offenses. And that'll be key entering week 1, because if you're talking like health, at least, quarterback play is likely to be the best it'll be all year entering week 1. So if you show value in an over, based on, your betting process, don't be hesitant to take it just because you're worried about how low scoring was this year. I think the overall scoring average wound up being around like 44.15 or somewhere in there, which is a pretty low number compared to what we saw in 2020. I think it was lower than 2021 as well. So you could be worried about that if you're seeing value in some overs, but recency bias could skew us towards unders. There were a lot of bad quarterback play the final month of the regular season. There was a lot of wind, a lot of cold, which I think impacted the way teams played it, even though I don't know. Should I factor that more in, I guess, for myself? But we can still get points when quarterbacks are healthy and when the guys around them are healthy. And I did not take the over in this game because it was fair value to me, but it made sense. It played out. So I think going into next year, if you like an over where quarterbacks are healthy, receivers are healthy, offensive line is healthy and stuff like that, I wouldn't get too worried about it just because of what we saw this year. I think that it comes down to quarterback health a lot of the time. The reason that scoring can be down other times. It was also there were a lot of heavy rushing teams and stuff like that, but don't worry too much if you see value in overs, because if teams are healthy, we can still see a lot of points put up on the board. Fourth takeaway from me, and this one's specific to last night's game, is don't factor in against the spread record when trying to predict what a team will do going forward. I saw some analysis this past week saying that the Chiefs were going to be overvalued in the Super Bowl because they went 7-11-1 against the spread to that point. And I can't get behind that kind of thought because the against the spread record shows that they had underperformed expectations to that point. But the market reacts because if people keep losing money on the Chiefs, they're not going to bet the Chiefs. And people aren't betting the Chiefs, that means that you're going to get less money on the Chiefs. That's going to have the market react. We saw this with the Super Bowl with the money coming in the Eagles. Probably partly a reaction to Mahomes' health, the receiver health, the Eagles being very good, stuff like that. And the market will react to this stuff. So that against the spread record is descriptive, not predictive. And it's baked into the current number. So you're using something that happened previously and is accounted for and using it to predict what will continue to happen. But there are a couple flaws in that. The first thing is that, as discussed, it's already factored in a way. The second is that the goal during the regular season is not for a team to cover. It's for them to win. And the Chiefs played with their food a lot during the regular season. We saw that pretty consistently, where I know that they covered in that Rams game. I think the spread is like 14.5 and they won by 16, but like they were absolutely playing with their food there. Their goal is not to cover, it's to win. So if they're up 7, spread's 9.5, who cares? So in a lot of ways, that against the spread record doesn't matter. Like, they don't care. I don't think we should either. If your model says that they've been efficient, who cares what their spread against the record is? So I think it's fine to cite this stuff. It is okay to mention it. I mentioned how the Jags have been good to me. That's basically a similar line of thought where I'd been betting them. I thought the market was undervaluing them, but I'm not telling you to bet the Jags because they've been good to me. I'm betting them because my numbers continue to show value. So make bets based on what you think will happen in the game, not what has happened in the past. And this is kind of true for all trendy type stuff. Like, Mike Tomlin is an underdog, Tom Brady is an underdog, stuff like that. I think that what you want to do is, if you look at that stuff, ask yourself, does this matter? And ask yourself, is the market accounting for it? The does this matter thing will lop off a lot of those trendy type bets. If it matters and the market is not accounting for it, you're good to go. That's probably a good thing to focus on. I think passing efficiency is underway in the market, stuff like that. If it matters, if it doesn't matter, if it leans on outdated data or it's accounted for by the market, try to find some other route for deciding what to bet on, or just don't bet the game at all. That's always an option too. So it's okay to look at that kind of stuff, but just make sure you tread lightly, because it can oftentimes lead you down very bad paths. If you already have like a thought in mind of who you want to bet, using that as a justification, maybe you should find a different justification. Maybe your justification for them is weak. So it's okay to look at that stuff. It's okay to talk about it, but do not use it as a reason for making a bet. The Chiefs against the spread record doesn't matter effectively. Like, yes, underperforming relative to expectations matters. It should bump them down, but the market was accounting for that because they were 1.5 point underdogs to the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Pretty clear they were accounting for that. So if you're using that number to analyze this game, I think that's pretty flawed thinking. So I know that you'll see like against the spread record, like on TV graphics and stuff like that, you'll see it cited online. Just be wary. If it's accounted for already, be wary of it. If it's not accounted for, sure, whatever, go. If you think the market is still undervaluing them, that's one thing. But don't use it as your sole justification for betting a team. Now, finally, the final takeaway for me is we need to continue to weigh situation heavily. And by situation, I mean play callers, pass catchers, offensive line, the infrastructure around a quarterback. And I care about it a lot. It's something that I want to emphasize, but I think I may have underweighted it a bit with the Eagles this year. My preseason win projection, if I go back to my preseason win totals, had the Eagles at 9.8 wins. That was above the bookmakers by a smidge. They were 9.5. It was 54% to go over that number. So basically right in line with the bookmakers, but it didn't have them anywhere near the best team in the NFC. They were behind Tampa Bay, Green Bay, San Francisco. A bunch of teams were above them. And I think that the reason I had them lower than I should have was because I underweighted the addition of A.J. Brown. And I paid for that financially early in the year. Across the first 8 weeks, my numbers told me to bet the spread against the Eagles 5 times. My numbers in those games were 1 and 4. So that was not good. Eventually, my numbers did catch up because, obviously new data is factored in and that adjusts. But if I had a higher baseline on the Eagles coming in, I would not have lost that money early in the season. So situation, infrastructure has been a big thing for me for a long time, but I think I need to recommit to it this offseason. Obviously, there are times where that would not work because that process could have led you to being too low in the Chiefs this year. They were still atop my preseason power rankings with the Bills. So, like, if you trust Patrick Mahomes, you wouldn't go that way. But, like, it could lead you down that path. And it also could have led to potentially being too high in the Jets. They did go over the win total, but, like, you could have been betting the Jets a lot. And that down the stretch, that would not have been a good thing. So it can go poorly. But with Jalen Hurts, he had proven he could be a solid quarterback. He could have solid efficiency numbers in a good situation. So I should have been higher on him in a great situation, which is what he had this year. So I want to remake sure that I am emphasizing that in my process this year, emphasizing infrastructure, emphasizing play calling, situation around the quarterback. And if it's really good and the quarterback has shown some semblance of competency, I should be pretty high on them. I was not low on the Eagles this year, but I was lower than I should have been. And I think that if I had weighed in the A.J. Brown edition more, weighed in the offensive line, had some trust in Shane Steichen and Nick Sirianni, maybe I'd have been higher on them and I wouldn't have lost those games earlier on. So situation matters a lot, unless you're Patrick Mahomes. And it's important to factor that in pretty heavily when you are making preseason priors, betting early on, and stuff like that. So those are my takeaways from this year. And I want to caveat that with those are my takeaways specifically. If you disagree with me, cool, that's fine. You should disagree with me. It means you're critically thinking and like coming to your own conclusions. Those are just my takeaways. And that's how I want to make my bets. But you got to find your own individual process. Got to find routes. Like maybe you think I'm wrong about passing efficiency. Sweet. Like, if you can find good profitable bets based off of that, that's awesome. My process though is that, and it's important to formulate your own process via going through this stuff, via thinking critically, via thinking, okay, what did I get wrong here? Did I get something wrong? Was it just variance? Was it whatever? But go back through your own process, go back through your own bets, decide what went wrong, why did it go wrong, what went well, why did it go well, or why did I benefit from variance there and stuff like that. I think that just that having a couple minutes to yourself before next year, thinking through while these things are still fresh in your mind, thinking through what you did this year, what you want to tweak for next year, put it down in a Google Doc or something like that to make sure you have a note for next year, because it's important to learn. And I think I learned a lot this year and it's been helpful for me. Hopefully can make me perform better next year, because again, my numbers did well this year, but I didn't have a great year. So I want to try to refocus that for next year. And it's okay if you disagree with the takeaways I discussed here. These are just my personal diary, basically, heading into 2023. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. As I said, we are back to regular bets coming up tomorrow. Going to have Brandon Gadula on to talk about some golf. We'll talk some, I believe, NBA as well. We're going to talk some NASCAR on Wednesday with Dr. Nick Giffen to get you set for the Daytona 500 and plenty more coming up throughout this week. So make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on the FanDuel YouTube page as well if you want to watch a video version of the show. If you've got any questions for me, or if you want to tweet your takeaways from betting this year at me, love to hear those. I'm on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Hopefully, last night was a fun one for you. Hopefully, it was a profitable one for you as well. But hopefully, again, having fun, the most important thing. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.